Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is the 9th film to be written and directed by Quentin Tarantino, and it stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt, who are an actor and the actor's stunt double, Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth respectively, who were working in Hollywood in the late 1960s. In particular, Rick Dalton was very famous for a lot of the cowboy shows and related movies that he did in the time. But at the time period set in this movie, he is starting to become a has-been. He doesn't have the same acting prowess as he once did. He doesn't have as many starring roles in comparison to other actors. And he's trying to find that same spark, while in the meantime, his stunt double Cliff Booth is trying to figure things out for himself as well, while also encountering some people who belong to the Manson family cult that were rampant in the area back in that time. If you're familiar with Quentin Tarantino's work, especially with films like Inglourious Basterds and Django Unchained, he is yet again taking another approach where he's revising history a little bit and creating a fantasy out of a time period involved with something horrifically violent and tragic, like the murder of Sharon Tate and the people who were at her home at the time. And he's trying to weave another kind of fairy tale fantasy type of thing out of an event like that. There will certainly be many people who claim that this movie is misogynistic or possibly is taking a true life tale that was very tragic and very violent and trying to make something different out of it and maybe trivializing the events that occurred. If anyone's going to try to make that argument about this movie, I'm not really going to refute that because, again, it's part of a discourse about a movie that I think is interesting, and also I think people should deserve to react in the way that they're going to when a filmmaker decides to take on such a bold topic as, the Manson family or something like that. Personally, though, I do think that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a very good film, much like Tarantino's filmography. And even though I don't quite like it as much as some of the films he's previously made, it is considerably better than most films that you might find on the market right now. Now, you probably guessed, due to the fact that this shirt is parodying Pulp Fiction, I'm a big fan of Quentin Tarantino's. I at least really like or love pretty much every single movie he's made. Particularly, I think Pulp Fiction and Inglourious Basterds are his best films. I haven't seen Death Proof or Jackie Brown, so I can't really comment on whether or not those might be better than those. But I do really love this filmmaker. And no matter what you say about his style, his approach to violence or his approach to women or anything like that, racial slurs, another example, you can't deny that this guy is so incredibly talented with his use of dialogue, language, motifs, and just camera work in general. He's so passionate about movies and everything that he does. And I think more than anything, this movie is a testament to his supreme love for not only cinema, but a very specific time period of film too. You can look at his entire filmography and it's very apparent that his style is very influenced by Sergio Leone, who is very famous for the Dollars trilogy, of course, but also made Once Upon a Time in the West and Once Upon a Time in America. You can look at this movie as an influence from that, not only because it has a title of Once Upon a Time in somewhere, but also the fact of its runtime and the kind of interactions that the characters have. This is very much a movie that feels like it takes place in the 60s, but also was produced in that time period too, which I think is a testament to the level of craft that Tarantino brings to this picture. My brother and I saw a 35mm print at Alamo Drafthouse, and watching this movie, because of the way color correction was done and the way that certain shots were framed and pieced together, it very much felt like a film from that era. Particularly, I thought of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which has kind of a similar shot structure to it, where there is a frequent amount of zooms, tracking shots, and long, gorgeous frames with practical effects and real locations too. Even though you can look at this movie and know it was produced in 2019 because of the actors that are in it, and definitely a stronger image that is being presented on screen, I think the fact that we saw it in 35mm in the way that Tarantino intended, and also with the way that it was produced, it definitely allowed me to be able to become immersed in a time period that is different in my own, and be able to watch characters interact in a way that shows what Hollywood was like at the time, in which it was shifting from what it used to be, from the golden era of Hollywood, and then moving on to something else. The character of Rick Dalton in particular is a strong example of this type of shift because he's a very fascinating, if perhaps a little bit a narcissistic type of individual who is focused so much on trying to get ahead with his own career that he might damage his relationship with others or trivialize them because he's trying to find the spark that got him into his career in Hollywood in the first place. And Leonardo DiCaprio really does sink into this role perfectly, and he has a lot of memorable, hilarious scenes, particularly in the end, that kind of punctuate the sort of folly of the type of character he's portraying. Even though Tarantino clearly loves Hollywood, he used his character as a way to show that there definitely is a lot of phoniness in Hollywood. And I think that works off really well with his relationship with Cliff Booth, Brad Pitt's character, because even though they have great chemistry together and those actors have a lot of great material that they share with one another, I think their dynamic is very interesting because Tarantino doesn't try to play up the drama at all of, Rick Dalton being this very wealthy and established individual, and Cliff Booth is kind of shafted because of his stunt double role. He kind of just allows the actors and the mise-en-scène and the set design to just show that to you, and I think that's a very interesting dynamic between those two, and it definitely kept me invested in both characters. On that note too, Brad Pitt, man, he gave perhaps one of the best performances in his entire career in this movie. And not even because of anything that he particularly does with the dialogue or anything. It's because he takes his persona and kind of eschews it in such a way that it's so apparent that he's trying to make fun of himself with Tarantino's dialogue that it makes for gut-bustingly hilarious moments that I couldn't get enough of, and certainly the theater I was in couldn't get enough too, because when certain moments would happen with his character, whether or not it's a moment of physicality or kind of talking about toxic masculinity a little bit, it would happen on screen most of the time just because of physical actions that are going on. And then everyone would just erupt with laughter, myself included. He's probably the standout character in this picture, even though Rick Dalton is a fun and interesting character as well. And I like that they both play off each other in the ways that they do. And it adds to kind of the story about, Hollywood trying to find its new direction in a changing time period. And I think that is very crucial in helping this story be an effective fantasy that it is, because in real life, when you have the character of Sharon Tate, who's portrayed by Margot Robbie in this movie, we all know that she was brutally murdered by the Manson family, in addition to 3 other of her friends that were staying in the Roman Polanski home at the time. By having the characters of Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth, I think that their characters and the roles that they serve in this movie are very crucial in making this fantasy work. And even though people will still have problems with how this movie ends, it's a very bold choice that Tarantino makes with the very final moments of this movie that could go either way, and people either hating the choice that he makes, or it could be a complete opposite where they might appreciate it in the same way that like Inglourious Basterds ended with its revisionist history type of thing. I thought it was incredible. It's definitely one of the most memorable endings to a movie I've seen perhaps all year. And I could not stop laughing. There are many amazing moments there. And even though there's some graphic violence involved, it's the kind of violence to where, you watch it and it's not meant to be there to, make you feel grossed out or to add in shock value. As one of my coworkers who also watched this movie said, it's graphic violence that's done tastefully. There are certainly going to be people who disagree with me, and that's completely fine depending on their taste, but I thought it was great, and it definitely added a little bit of a punctuating level of satisfaction and catharsis that was needed for a story like this. If I'm going to talk about flaws, though, I do think this runtime the movie goes with does go a little bit long. I mean, it's about 160 minutes. And even though that's not something new with Tarantino, this movie doesn't have as much of a sense of energy or purpose as those other films did. There's less of a clear plot that's driving the story forward. And so because of that, I think in some sequences where you're just watching a character do something, or they might be engaged in their daily life, whether or not they might be on the set or at home, it's entertaining and it's fun and it's certainly well made, but they don't necessarily have the same driving force that sometimes accompanied some of his other films, like Kill Bill, for example, where that was completely driven by Beatrix Kiddo's desire to kill all of the assassins that she was a part of, and then ultimately kill Bill as well. This one, the runtime definitely is felt, and I think he could have trimmed a little bit more from this story, and it could have ultimately had the same effect as it would have otherwise. And another thing too is that even though the dialogue is pretty great in this movie in general, it doesn't have the same bite or the same spark as some of the other lines that he's written. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to try to compare so much of one film to the other because he is definitely trying something different and unique with this movie that he hasn't done with other ones. And for the most part, it succeeds, I think. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, in general, is a very good film, and I think it should be seen for sure, even if you have some preconceived notions about what he may feel about the Manson family or his treatment of women. But certainly it's well crafted, the dialogue is on point, and just watching all these actors interact with one another is enough. And with all that the story is doing in terms of its themes and about Hollywood moving forward, or actors trying to push themselves forward in a direction while kind of shafting others, is interesting, and I definitely think it's worth considering and just watching in general. With that, I will be giving Once Upon a Time in Hollywood a B+. As far as an age recommendation goes, Tarantino's movies are all rated R for a reason. For the most time, they're because of graphic violence that's incorporated into the stories, while also incorporating a lot of language too. That definitely is the case here. There isn't as much language in this film as other Tarantino joints, like Pulp Fiction, for example. But there is enough strong adult language to be considered. And also, the violence is pretty restrained for a Tarantino movie as well. At least until the last 15 minutes, because there is some intensity that goes on. But again, depending on what you personally think about violence being portrayed in movies, you may find that sequence in the end to be more tasteful than others might. But in general, because of the content that's in here and the way that's presented, I think that this is best for people who are at least 16 years old. Thank you so much for watching. I do have some more reviews planned pretty soon, so look forward to more content coming out in the next few weeks. And there's definitely going to be a greater frequency of content too. I've just been pretty busy these last few weeks, but I have more things planned, I have more movies to see, and I look forward to providing you with some more videos to check out. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe. It really does help grow my channel here. And in addition, please check out my Facebook, Letterboxd, and Instagram pages linked below in the description, where you'll find content that you wouldn't normally find here. But in the end, thank you for watching, and you have a good one.